All right, so it is all going off for Bitcoin right now. We are sitting at 112,750, and we are quickly approaching this support zone that sits at about 110k. Obviously, I think a lot of this has developed off the back test of our support level. We fell below support over here, right here on the 18th of August, and crucially, we got that big back test over here, which was actually quite bearish for the market, and I think that resulted in the continued losses today. Now, this isn't really a Bitcoin thing. The S&P 500 is really what's kind of leading this charge downwards right now, and I think that definitely isn't surprising because we understand that Bitcoin just doesn't really have that kind of autonomy in the market anymore. It kind of does move, based on traditional finance. A lot of people don't know this yet, and it's probably because they're not paying attention, but this has been a pretty clearly established kind of principle for this market for a while now. And, the S&P 500 has support kind of right where it is right now. It could find support a little bit lower at about 62.50, and of course its previous all-time high from when the tariff drama kind of started sits at about 61.30. So that's a bit of a drop from here. That's still another couple percentage points for, the S&P 500 to drop down there, and that would probably, I think that would result in kind of a sub 100k Bitcoin if it did end up going there. But we're nowhere near any of that happening right now. We're just kind of dealing with what we have in front of us, and that is that Bitcoin is approaching support levels right now. So, as far as, this chart kind of telling us a story, it's not looking too bad. We've got a couple different kind of perspectives of, charts that we've been watching. I think one of the other really bad things that did happen last night was, yesterday, in yesterday's trading session was, that Bitcoin found resistance at the top of this kind of parallel channel, which is quite problematic. Like, that's really not what you want to see as far as telling you that, we're in good posture. But, as far as that posture does go, we do still have support over here, right? Like at this kind of low point here. So, this is going to be sitting at about 112, basically 111.7, but I don't really know how much I have faith in any of these support levels. If you zoom out a little bit and you start looking at some cleaner charts, these are some of the key support levels that we've had outlined for a long time now. And those of you that watch this channel consistently are going to know all about why we're interested in those levels. But for the most part, you're getting a pretty obvious kind of bounce zone here because that's where Bitcoin previously bounced off of, and it was a prior all-time high. But below that, 107k definitely makes sense. It's got a lot of confluence from, previous all-time high hits, a lot of consolidation and so on. Below that, we've got 104, 105. Honestly, all of these support levels are very mushy. They're very blurry. A lot of people have ideas about where in this north of 100k range that they think we're going to bottom out in. And, frankly, I think that a lot of those ideas are quite silly because it's, like I said, it's just such a mushy support level that it's very hard to say unless you're using other tools and other indicators, which we're going to get to in a moment. It's actually very hard to have any kind of clarity about where we're going to, stop moving down, if anywhere at all in this range. Given just how it's just been a weird range. We've kind of done everything in this range. We haven't really respected levels. So, I don't think that's the end of the world. I just think it's important to kind of understand the limitations of where TA, can take us right now. But like I said, when you start throwing indicators on this chart, it doesn't look as bad at all. On the daily Ichimoku cloud, which is obviously, in my opinion, quite a reliable indicator for Bitcoin, especially, a couple of times before it fails, and especially on time frames like this, it's given us a massive range of support that stretches from 112 down to 98 and 99. And I think this really kind of underscores how I feel about the market. I'm really glad that we're looking at this indicator first because, it's a perfect visual representation of how I feel about where the support is in this market. For me, what I see on this chart, put simply, ladies and gents, is that Bitcoin has managed to sustain an incredible rally, for a very long amount of time now. I mean, again, just kind of zooming out to the start of this market cycle way down here, all the way up to where we are right now, taking a look at it on the logarithmic chart to kind of put everything in perspective properly. I think Bitcoin's done incredibly well, and it's very hard to shake a market that's done this well. People will not make you feel that way. Social media, Twitter, YouTube, God forbid CNBC or anything else like that won't make you feel this way. If you're looking at the charts, but those are not people who understand how to read charts anyway. This is an aggressive uptrend, right? As far as a maturing asset at north of $2 trillion market cap goes. this is a very aggressive chart. And, we understand the tolerances for bull markets. I mean, this was a 33% drop and it didn't end the bull market. This one right here was a 20% odd drop and it didn't end the bull market. This one, of course, 32%. And again, it didn't end the bull market. So, if we're just going to kind of match those drops, then, that puts us down at $83,000. And, this might sound very silly, very far out there, and of course it always does until you kind of start heading down there. So my job as a real trader, somebody that's not just here, for the social media clout, is to be aware of these possibilities. Now, many people, social media or not, are not anything close to what a real trader looks like, and their main strategy basically boils down to a shitload of hope and very, very bad practices. That's obviously not what you get here on this channel. I don't sympathize with any of that. I think it's very, very irresponsible. And we're trying to go for a much more kind of realistic approach to the market. And anyone that's aiming to have a realistic approach to the market needs to constantly be prepared for the possibility that big drops or big pumps can happen in either direction. You need to know what that looks like, right? It's not about expecting it. It's not about thinking that it's definitely going to happen. It's about respecting that it can happen. And if you don't respect that it can happen, you're probably going to end up taking positions that can get you hurt if, unforeseen circumstances happen, which obviously, that does happen a lot. So I think this is really important. If Bitcoin does end up falling down, it's got support everywhere. It's got so much support on this chart. As far as I'm concerned, as long as we don't drop below 74K, which was our prior macro low, we're good, right? Like we establish macro lows as we go up in the trend. Here's one, here's another. Macro lows, right? On a large scale, what are the lows that the market is punching in? And as long as on a macro scale you don't break them, for example, as long as this drop doesn't come lower than this, you're good. Like you're still maintaining, higher highs and higher lows, right? Kind of something a little bit like this where, the chart kind of, fills this out. As long as you're doing that, you're fulfilling, the definition of an uptrend. And that means, there's a lot of tolerance for Bitcoin to drop down. The real number in my experience is 40%. Bitcoin can drop as low as 40%, which actually matches this low. That would be incredible if Bitcoin can get a double bottom over there. Just imagine how bearish people would be while Bitcoin still hasn't even broken a macro support level. I mean, there are macro support levels in between, but like I said, they're very blurry. They're not strong. And if the S&P is coming down for that full back test, which granted, I don't think that's happening. It's way too early to say. It's a very, very small move, and we need to drop by another 4%, which is quite substantial for the S&P 500. But if that is what we're seeing, then it does line up with a really quite phenomenal zone on the chart, a zone that a lot of people are going to lose their minds over, but a zone that actually would be phenomenal to kind of trade at least to kind of catch a bottom and then really skyrocket higher. You'd probably see, a trend that looks a little bit more like this coming afterwards, right? If Bitcoin does do something like that, I want to show you what I imagine that would look like after, having done this for 8 years and seeing, many, many kind of situations play out that kind of look a little bit like this. And, I would kind of see something a little bit like this. Obviously, I would expect it to be more aggressive because we'd probably have to break that high with a lot of aggression the next time. Look, you're stacking probabilities at that point. Your overall chance of being correct is lower. But I think it's useful to kind of visualize what, a nasty trend could look like as well, so that we're not too scared of it. But like I said, way too early to get to any of that right now. There's a ton of support above 100K. I really don't care for which support level we use. We've got the daily EMA ribbon here, if I'm not mistaken. No, we've actually lost the daily EMA ribbon now, so that's going to start turning into resistance. And speaking of things turning into resistance, on the 4-hour, it's already been offering resistance to the market, but with the Ichimoku cloud, it's also now developed into a resistance cloud, meaning that if Bitcoin does manage to punch higher, if it doesn't do that quickly, i.e. if it takes a long time to do that, it's probably going to start encountering more resistance building up here, and we're already seeing that with the EMAs, which probably, sit at about over here. Let's just kind of check out where the EMAs are sitting right now. Yeah, so they're going to be kind of blending down like that. So there's going to be more resistance for Bitcoin to capture on the way up. But again, I think Bitcoin is going to have no problem dealing with that if the S&P kind of pulls itself back up. Because ultimately, as we know very, very well, the same money that moves the S&P is the same money that moves Bitcoin these days. For the most part, there are exceptions. You're not smart for pointing them out. We've been over that a million times. And I think that makes it quite predictable and easy for us to kind of see where the markets could go if we can just kind of anchor ourselves with the S&P 500. Now, one possibility I do want to outline is that Bitcoin could end up looking for a new parallel channel here, something a little bit like this. And, we've kind of got the tops drawn out for that very well. We've got a lot of trading, a lot of consolidation happening at the midpoint of this range. I really think that this is a range that's worth kind of looking at, especially if the market does defend this 112K level. We're going to start going in a really, really nice predictable range. This could turn into another like 7-month consolidation. I hope not, obviously, but it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if it did happen. It would kind of suck, but it would mean that altcoins rally really hard, which would be really, really fun. Obviously, that might happen in the context of rate cuts. I don't know. Again, it's also bound by the S&P 500. But in all of these situations, if Bitcoin can actually hold well in this range, that would be incredibly bullish, because that would mean that we've now got to target the 124K level once again. And, obviously that would be a really, really nice kind of price zone for Bitcoin to return to. And it's definitely something that I would love to see in this market. Now, as far as Bitcoin dominance, it's giving us some clues. Bitcoin dominance hasn't shot up with this move. And, so far that has been a representation of positive investor confidence, right? And I think that's not surprising at all, right? Overall, despite how panicked you might feel, or despite how panicked other members of retail might feel, the market's not in a bad place. We've pulled back by, a small percent, and it is Bitcoin, so we're okay with that. 10% is really not concerning, and it's taken about 4 days. Admittedly, it's quick, but that's also fine. We're not scared of quick price movements either. So I don't think Bitcoin's done anything, particularly concerning. I mean, yeah, it's not great that, we had a weak break of the all-time high. I agree. That's not good. But again, if the uptrend's still intact, then it's not over until it's over. And I think the people that, really struggle with this are the same people that probably offloaded heavily up here. And obviously, they're kind of, only just now getting ready to be able to buy back in at the same levels that they sold at. You know what I mean? So, it's kind of, a representation to me of somebody who just doesn't really understand how trends work in the market, or more importantly, somebody who wants to be emotional about their position in the market, which there are a lot of people like that, because a lot of people, like I said, are not here to make money. They're just here for some fun, and they're lying to themselves about it. They tell themselves it's about money, but then their actions point toward looking for thrills in the market and so on. Now, one thing I really like about this is we're seeing altcoins approach back into some really nice buy zones. XRP is back below $3. XRP against Bitcoin is down by a little bit as well, down at this midpoint, which has historically been a kind of decent level to buy XRP, especially just going back, kind of over the last month. It's been a pretty nice zone. I don't know if that's going to stay this way, but the next great zone to buy XRP is obviously going to be down here in the 2000s. And then similarly for other coins, Solana BTC has taken a small dip down. This is fantastic. Solana has to break this resistance level at 0.17 BTC per token. And obviously, as we know, the more that we kind of hit these resistance levels, the weaker they tend to get. So yes, this result, the result of this move was not a breakout. We ended up getting rejected. But this is, yet another retest of that level, which is going to make it weaker still, which I think is really, really cool. I mean, since March, we've tested this level 1, 2, I don't even know if I can count these, 1, 2, 3, 4 times now we've tested this level properly, and then 5, 6, 7 times if we're being a little bit more generous with how we define it, which I think is fine, because it is still more of a range. This is the Bitcoin chart after all, so it's kind of a secondary analysis chart, but I think it's much more important than the dollar chart, because ultimately we don't care about any of these altcoins if they're not outperforming Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a safe crypto asset to be in. Solana by extension is not, because Solana is a lot smaller. So obviously I think it's very safe overall, but especially compared to the filth in the market, I should say. I mean, overall, it's probably incredibly risky because it's in crypto. But as far as the crypto risk profile goes, Solana's looking pretty decent. And then again, just continuously hitting that resistance level is a strong indication to me that it could get that breakout. Same goes for Cardano. Cardano did manage to get a breakout above this zone here. It's now encountering resistance at this 833 zone on this chart, which has historically, again, also been a problem for Cardano. But again, these levels, they're not going to last forever. If we keep on trying to hit them, we're probably going to end up breaking out, and then there are big breakouts to come for tokens like Solana. I mean, if Solana kind of returns to anywhere near to its former glory, there is an incredible percentage gain to be made there against Bitcoin, which would be very, very exciting in any sort of true alt season if we're going to get one. I still think that, of course, that's possible. And as far as my opinions on Bitcoin dominance kind of picking back up and Bitcoin kind of seizing control of the markets again with that dominance, I still think that that's entirely possible. I don't know exactly how that's going to play out yet, but what I will note for you guys is that this downtrend has become less aggressive over time. This is pretty clear to see if we just measure out the moves that we've seen so far. We can take this info line and measure from this top down to this low right here. That was an 8.6% relative drop. And if we go ahead and just move that out a little bit, and then if we go ahead and kind of measure the next one, we should probably zoom in a tiny bit. We can then measure out what this next drop was, which was right here down to this low. And this was a 4.6% relative move, so we're clearly getting weaker already. But then this final move down over here that we've had most recently is even smaller, and this one comes in at 3.1%. So, I don't think it's any surprise that our dumps have gotten weaker for Bitcoin dominance. If we take a look at what this crash has been so far, and by the way, before we do that, just take a look at this all side by side. You can see how these drops have gotten progressively weaker, which is, to be expected if we're not seeing a real alt season yet. But, if we also just kind of measure out the biggest drop that we had on Bitcoin dominance so far in relative terms, this one was 11.2% from the high to the low. And so far we're down by about 10.3% in relative terms. So again, we're holding, pretty decent, right? Like this isn't something that we haven't seen in this market cycle so far. And that definitely means that, we haven't breached essentially like alt season from last time. Now, if we do take another leg down, that would definitely cement it. And that would mean that 100% we are seeing a bigger, at least mini alt season than we saw last time. Whether it's the real alt season obviously remains to be seen because we'd have to drop down here, but that is still going to be a very, very strong indication that this is turning into something a little bit more real. So we'll have to see how that goes. If we do drop down a little bit, that's still not going to be me calling for alt season because it hasn't happened until it's happened. And then either way, it's smart to be positioned for it at this stage because, Bitcoin dominance is high. And I think that for sure, a portfolio that wants to be in altcoins has probably already started accumulating altcoins at least. And is at some kind of, exposure to altcoins now, if that portfolio does want that exposure for alt season, right? This is kind of where you want to do it, while Bitcoin dominance is, higher than essentially the 40-50% range, because then it's got quite a long way that it could drop down if that's what you're expecting. So I think that's also pretty cool. And, as far as Bitcoin finding support, if it does find support, like I said, we got to watch this midpoint here at about 117.8. There's a bunch of different kind of resistance levels. I think the main one's going to be 117k flat. This is basically where Bitcoin just got rejected off to start this, next leg of the downtrend down toward 112. So, that's something that I think is something that, we've just got to keep an eye out for and keep watching. And then obviously if we do hit that high, then of course just penetrating that top and getting an explosion, I think is incredibly likely. And once again, I can't stress enough, I do think that this is largely dependent on the S&P 500. I don't really care about why this drop happened. It was kind of due for a drop. It was moving up continuously for a while. And the S&P 500 is pretty used to having quite shallow pullbacks. So if this does turn into a shallow pullback, then any panic that you're seeing on Bitcoin right now, any kind of hysteria, is obviously going to look very, very silly in a week or two or a couple of weeks from now. And of course, if we're not able to, retain those longer term perspectives of the market, that's going to, come back and bite us in the backside later on down the line. So we really want to we really want to make sure that we're not kind of losing perspective of what the market is actually at during times like this. I think that's really, really important. If you did enjoy this video, obviously we're giving you a very kind of, grounded, realistic approach to how analysis kind of really tells you a story in these markets. We're really not interested in panicking or getting excited. We just want to make money here. If that sounds like something you're interested in, then smash up those likes, subscribe, take the build, all that good stuff. You've got my socials down here. You've got the best exchanges in the game links over here. Check them out if you're not from a restricted region, the 𝗙𝗢𝗟𝗟𝗢𝗪 Gold Telegram channel, where we post more insights over there, and direct contact to a member of the team over here if you're interested in our exclusive program. It's a 12-week program, incredibly successful. We have pulled off some very, very impressive results in there with 100% success rate as well, because it is a very, very exclusive program. So if you want to get yourself inside, find out what that's about, then reach out. It is expensive, but it's obviously going to be well worth it on the other side. If you have enjoyed this one, you know what to do. We'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.